All right. I'm going to do a video here about the various reputation kit modules and which ones that I personally feel are good and which ones are less useful. This is one you'll see in a lot of builds because of the fact that it does a lot of damage, especially when you use it from a relatively long range. I think it's a 30-meter range on this one. So having enemies be beyond 25 meters will do a lot of damage to them. A lot of enemies just will get KO'd instantly. Thing is, not all builds want to do that, so it's not something that necessarily works with all builds, but there's a lot of builds that find this to be useful. What's time device? Primary effect is something people use a lot as a way to reduce cooldowns on their kit modules, because you activate this, then you spam all of your other kit modules, and each time you activate a kit module in sequence, it reduces the cooldown on the kit modules that are currently on cooldown. Good stuff. And also, while the effect is active, if you would get KO'd, it will res you. Quite useful. Alright, 8472. This here is a grenade that has a pretty good base damage, honestly. I mean, like, comparing it to something like the cryo grenade, this has around 500, a little less in terms of raw damage. And this has, over 700 at Mark 12. Granted, I personally suspect this one actually wouldn't scale particularly high because some of these have that are gold quality that start out have wonky scaling and scale very gradually. I'm not sure about this one. I don't have a Mark 15. Still, though, the base damage is quite good. The effects are kind of useless. The negative run speed on this one is very weak. I mean, like, when you look at these cold ones, the negative run speed, if they apply negative. Well, this one just roots your targets. This one, minus 66% run speed. This is only 16%. 1/6 versus 66. Yeah. The run speed reduction is nearly useless. The raw damage is what you would want. This, however, has very similar raw damage and a bigger AoE. The size of the AoE on grenades is actually very important because of the fact that enemies will try to get away from them some of the time, anyways. Most of the time? Yeah, let's go with most of the time. And that means that the whole damage reduces from epicenter thing kicks in, because the enemy might be like halfway to the edge of the damage area when it actually goes off. The simple fact that this has a much larger damage area really, really helps with that. Oh, on a minor side note, using microcryonic warheads to root the targets, then nailing them with a grenade, that's exceptionally mean. And they usually die. Anyway, though, moving on. Photonic Overcharge. If you're crit stacking, this can be useful as part of that. It's actually got a relatively short cooldown, and also it gives you bonus radiation damage while the effect is active. It is very similar in some ways to cryotronic modulation. This one just gives you bonus damage, though, so not sure exactly how they would stack with each other. Maybe they stack, maybe they don't. Micro torpedo launcher. Much like the cold cryo torpedo thing, this is something where it's in many ways similar to a grenade, except that the target doesn't get a warning. It just hits them. Boom! This one actually does more damage to the primary target than the grenades we looked at earlier. However, half of that damage also applies in an AoE. That's only a 3-meter radius AoE, mind you. However, like I mentioned earlier about the whole thing with like enemies having the opportunity to run away, with this, they don't. It just hits them before they get a chance to run from it. So, in that case, cluster them, hit them. Because, quite frankly, stuff like Graviton Spike, great way to lead for a grenade. Uh, Pulls them into the center, reduces their run speed by quite a lot temporarily, and also some enemies will just die because, quite frankly, Graviton Spike hurts. Then fling this into the center to finish off whoever lived. Chronoton Micro Torpedo Spread. Much like I mentioned about the Cryo one earlier, Cone AoE does a significant amount of damage, slows the targets, and also has a chance of knocking them back. Note how this says 1.2 meters. That's really not very far. It's mostly just like knocks them down, and then they have to do an animation to get up before they can attack you again, which, eh. It's an effect, I guess. Piezoelectric grenade. Yet another grenade. This one is much like the ice grenade in that it has multiple kinds of damage and it doesn't really do a huge amount of kinetic damage. It has secondary effects added that are what make it more useful. Uh, I like the ice grenade better simply because of the fact that the hold target, who cares? It's only a chance, so it's a lot of time not going to help. The electric damage with 50% shield penetration, again, if I kill them, um, well, a lot of the time when you're doing stuff like this, you're going to down their shields anyways, so the shield penetration isn't something that you really want, especially since the kinetic damage, again, only 50% shield penetration. Notably, with the ice version, it's also 50% shield penetration, but it's primarily cold damage, and it gives them negative cold resistance. So you hit them with that, then hit them with this, and whatever. You're probably dead by that point. Containment field. This is a pain in the ass to use because of the fact that you have to force enemies to touch it. Or use it on an enemy that's just stupid enough to touch it anyways. Because what this does is you target the enemy, it creates a ring around the enemy. Well, bubble, actually, I guess. If the enemies, okay, if any enemy touches the bubble while the bubble is there, and it only stays there for 10 seconds, any enemy touching the bubble takes a significant amount of damage if they touch the bubble. This is a pretty good team buff. Good bonus all damage, has bonus run speed, and as a secondary effect, it gives you a little bit of resistance to certain things. Not energy damage resistance, though. Also, with this one, the buff will be extended each time you kill an enemy while you have this active. I'm pretty sure that includes stuff like enemy turrets, too. Any foe. And if you max out the extended duration by killing a whole bunch of stuff, this will actually give you 2/3 uptime, even if you're not using things to force the cooldown to reset faster. Alright, now to switch to a science character and look at these science ones. Alrighty then. Okay, we'll start with Gamma Task Force this time. This is something that, unlike the tactical version, I personally find to be pretty useless. Why? One, it's not a team buff. It's a single target hypo. Now, there might be some way you could make it act like a team buff, but even then, the effect really isn't all that good because remember how the other one had as a side effect, in addition to giving bonus damage, um, some resistances? Well, that side bonus is literally the only thing this one does. Now, granted, the resistances on this are larger, so it wouldn't necessarily be completely useless in certain specific situations where you're expecting to take large amounts of physical or kinetic damage. And this can be extended to have a duration of up to 45 seconds. So you would have like 12 seconds between that and when you can reapply it if you don't have cooldown. Some situations it might be useful, most of them it won't. Much like the integrated electrical field. Enemies are often not going to touch this thing because they're just coded to avoid hazards and try to move away from hazards. This is a hazard. So they will quite often just not go there. And the fact that a lot of enemies will just stand back and shoot at you, they wouldn't walk around anyway. So, yeah. Um, One thing to note about this, though, is that if you spawn camp enemies right, you can force enemies to touch it by placing them where they are going to cross the enemy spawn point. So the enemies literally spawn on top of the electrical barrier and thus take damage immediately upon spawning and stuff like that. It can be done. I personally find it to be annoyingly fickle and difficult to use, so I quit using it years ago. Well, it's been a while, yeah. Piezoelectric lattice. If you're doing an electric themed build for ground, this is actually something that's useful because of the fact that this will trigger the duty officer that gives you negative damage resistance rating on ground. Yeah, most science kit debuffs are applied. Yeah. Um, Realistically, most of the science kits that are like true science kit modules, like this one, that do damage also apply some sort of a debuff. So that particular duty officer, um, yeah, it makes a lot of things a lot more painful, and this is one of them. Have This isn't necessarily something that you would want to use as like a primary attack, but use this, then throw something like ball lightning at them, or one of the other harder hitting ones. Yeah, that'll kill things. Not necessarily the best, but something that's useful. And this actually is one of the better rep kits for science damage because of just the weirdness that it does. Also, this creates a very strange visual effect when it's active on things of like a optical distortion, like they're being like displaced in time or something. The visual effect alone is cool enough to get this so you can see how it does things. And this is one of those kits where it will force enemies to a specific location because you target an enemy and then this will pull that enemy toward the targeted location and nearby enemies too. Which, yeah, that is pretty painful. This is an interesting one because the fact that while it is extremely similar to the medical nanite cloud, it has a different cooldown than the medical nanite cloud. So if the medical nanite cloud is on cooldown, you could use this and vice versa. However, the main benefit for this is reviving allies. Like stuff like Arena of Zompek or some other TFO where an ally gets KO'd and you want to revive them quickly. This will revive them very quickly. And um, it's also a relatively weak AoE heal, but it is an AoE heal. Notably, the AoE on this one for the heal is only 4 meters, so don't expect it to hit everyone on your entire team. Mostly just whoever you revive with it. And again, when it says nearby unconscious allies, it means within 4 meters. So get close. However, again, if you want to revive people really quickly, this can get the job done. It's only for science. I'm not a personal fan of these front-facing cone attacks. A cone attack that is actually targeted at your enemy, so that whichever angle your enemy is at, it works. Actually, you know what? On second thought, I'm not actually 100% sure if this was actually a targeted cone or one of those that just fires straight ahead. If it's a targeted cone, it's somewhat better. Honestly, though, this is more of a debuff than a damaging ability. Because negative perception will cause enemies to lose the ability to shoot at you. Because if they can't see you, they can't target you. It also causes them to have a massive damage dealt penalty, which okay, if they actually can see you, they do less damage. Sure. This is actually something I legitimately like quite a lot because of the fact that it is a large AoE. It does that same thing where it reduces their energy damage. Their reduced movement speed is inconsequential. Note how this says that it has a 10-meter AoE. That is quite significant. See, what's the AoE on this one? Oh, 2 meters. And this one is actually I don't think it says it. I think it's about 5 meters. And now we have this. I don't like this one because of the fact that enemies have to be very close to you in order for you to hit them at all with it. It's like 4 or 5 meters. It's not good. Other than that, it would actually be quite a useful kit module. It's just, man, the range on it's terrible. And that's it for science. Now to move to the engineering stuff. Okay, so for this one, we start with the Undine repline, which is actually one of the things that I personally found to be highly disappointing because of the fact that, okay, look at the 88.7 hit points a second and the 15 all damage resistant rating. Those are abilities that a standard nanite medical generator has. However, this kit module, yeah, I'll just do a comparison. Alright, let's see here. Medical generator. 12, clicky, purple. Here we are. Now, 88.7 and 18. And 13-second recharge. Now, the hit points per second is actually about the same. The damage resistance rating is only a little bit lower. So it is, for the most part, an upgrade because it gives you bonus psionic and toxic damage resistance rating. But psionic and toxic damage are not things that you see against most enemies on the ground. Obviously, there are examples that are quite notable, but not something you're going to see all the time. So it's entirely possible that you would prefer to have the standard effect on these. All right, Delta Lights. Neutronic mortar. Like I said earlier about neutronic grenades, the blast radius on these mortars is actually better than a standard mortar. And that's the biggest selling point. Sure, it has a secondary effect, reduced movement speed, reduced energy damage. It's useful. But the raw kinetic damage and the fact that it has a large AoE, so it's going to hit targets a lot easier than a standard mortar, that's your real main selling point of this thing. Here is one of the most fun things in the game. A very unique hit module that is extremely powerful, but not something that I want to put in all builds because of the fact that it's purely defensive. Photonic barrier gives anyone standing in it, which is a 6 meter radius, um, several hundred temporary hit points every 3 seconds. That's a lot of temporary hit points, especially since it refreshes them constantly every few seconds. Very good. Also, it gives you a little bit of damage resistance rating. And if it gets destroyed, it actually has a relatively short recharge for a turret that you place for healing. Great stuff. Especially since you can stack this with the regular medical generators and shield generators for a third layer of defense. You have shields, your regular hit points, and temporary hit points. Yeah, that's some good tanking there. Override shield safeties. Shield tanking is interesting, and then it explodes to deal disruptor damage to enemies within 10 meters of you. That is a very, very weird one, and it's actually one of the few that I've never actually tried using. Note, however, that this is not a shield heal. This reduces damage done to shields. However, if your shields are down, it doesn't work, and they still hit you in the face. Also, the buff lasts for 5 seconds, and it has a 20-second recharge. So you need to reduce the recharge time on this one if you're going to use it in combat heavily. Here's one of my personal favorites, Bioharmonic Emitter. The temporary hit points on this are pretty impressive. And it also gives you a heal over time to your real hit points, not the temporary hit points. That is not what is the best effect of this. The best effect of this is something that's not actually listed in the tooltip. Notice how it says temporary hit points to team. What it means by team is you, other players that you are teamed with, bridge officers if there are any, and any pets summoned by you, your allies, or pets of your allies. It applies temporary hit points and a heal over time to all of that. If you're making assimilated Borg drones, yeah. Gives those temporary hit points and a heal over time. Great stuff. Also, this has an infinite range. Every ally on the map, even if they are like 100 meters away from you, it still hits them and heals them, no matter what. That is a really, really useful thing, especially in missions like Pavo Ground, where you're usually not going to have all of the players in the same area. That mission you need to divide and conquer in order to get the mission done. So you're not going to be within line of sight range in order to use heal on someone. This thing will hit them anyways, even if they are all the way on the other side of the map. And it will hit all of their pets too. And for pet spam builds, as an engineer, ooh boy, this is something good. Oh yeah. Also, it interacts very strangely with Mud's time device because of the fact that it's one of those kits modules that applies the effect of Mud's time device once for each of the targets hit by it. Although they nerfed Mud's time device so that it doesn't give you huge cooldown reductions anymore, this still gives you a heavier cooldown reduction than it logically should. Anyways, moving on to the Lucari stuff. Oh, I have that. Yeah, forgot I put that there. Anyways, Protomatter Generator Drone. I've used these, they don't suck. Um, it's a mobile version of a medical generator. That, in and of itself, is actually pretty good because of the fact that the number one downside of health generators, they don't move. This does, and it gives you both health and shield regeneration. That's actually quite useful. Side note, and something that this doesn't actually list on the tooltip or the ability, is the fact that this actually slowly dies while you have it out. The 20, it actually doesn't list in here how long the drone lives because of the fact that you using abilities to heal the drone will actually extend its lifespan and prevent it from dying as quickly as it normally would. Why they made the thing slowly kill itself, I have no idea. But they did. But yeah, it's like bioharmonic emitter would actually extend the drone's lifespan. But if you're using two different heals like that, why? Alright, next up. This is something that is very, very esoteric. Of all of the rep kit modules, this is the most off the wall weird. Why? Flare mortars will give enemies a negative stealth value and your allies a positive stealth value and a dodge rating bonus. That's a big dodge rating bonus, by the way. It really means it when it says 47% dodge chance. And that stacks with other dodge chance bonuses. It makes it so that you actually have greater than a 50% chance of dodging enemy attacks some of the time. And that is no joke. Because dodging will cut damage by 50%. And this gives you a passive dodge chance that applies as long as the flare mortars are still being fired. Which you will see by having the entire screen be lit up with a eerie red light. Now, the anti-stealth aspect of this is highly situational because most enemies don't use stealth. They just don't. Now, the fact that it gives your allies a stealth rating of 450 is no joke because of the fact that in many cases it will functionally blind enemies and leave them unable to attack you because they just can't see you. Now, I'm pretty sure that on advanced and elite, enemies have resistances to stuff, or well, enemies have a higher perception stat. I think that's the way it works. And you have to have your stealth rating exceed the enemy's perception stat in order to have the stealth effect work. Which is also a formula that scales based on range to target and so on and so forth. And I'm not sure how it's calculated. Obviously, this isn't going to make you completely immune to being attacked just because you used it, but it does have a lot of defensive benefits. And it's also another thing with flare mortars is that enemies don't aggro onto them. They just don't because of the fact that the flare mortar doesn't do damage. And that, yeah, that's a thing. And last but not least, cloaking mine barrier. These are the Houdini mines from Star Trek Deep Space Nine, used by the Dominion in the Dominion War, and by the Jem'Hadar enemies that you fight in story missions. Yeah, this is an ability that was actually added to the game back when the Jim Hadar featured episode series was added to the game. And it is quite painful. Now, the other thing with this is says initial mine detonation spawns another cloaked mine nearby. That's not actually as useful as it sounds because the fact that it functionally means that this has 6 cloaked mines, and one of which spawns later than the other ones do. Not necessarily bad, but not something that I would personally consider to be something that's necessarily something you can count, shall we say. But the damage on this is quite good, especially because the fact that each of the mines that gets triggered by an enemy being in the area does separate damage. So that 500 or 732 points of damage might get done to the same enemy 2 or 3 times. Also, mine explosions are an AoE, every single one of them. So if you manage to use something like, say, the Discovery uh, Gravity Containment Unit to suck enemies into the minefield, all of the enemies that survive the suck box effect will have several mines explode on their faces, which will probably kill them. And with that, I'm going to call it here. Cloak Mine Barrier, and quite useful. Again, though, each of these things is something that you need to decide what your build strategy is going to be and whether or not you're going to use it. Because, let's face it, there are 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. Okay, that one counts twice. So that's 10 different kit modules that a player has to choose from when building a set of skills, and that's not counting the standard modules and the lockbox modules and stuff like that. So you're definitely not going to use all of these. However, some of them are very interesting options and things that are uniquely different and something worth considering. I honestly dislike the tactical ones most of all of these because most of the tactical ones are something simplistic like a grenade or a rocket that you fire at your opponent. Yes, sure, it does damage. Damage is good. However, making all of the tactical abilities just damage is boring. And with that, I'm going to call this time. See you guys later.